She's going to come. And when she does, every person in that ballroom will finally see what a mistake looks like. Robert Hutton adjusted his cufflinks and smiled at nothing in particular. The invitation had been his masterpiece. Cream cardstock, gold embossed lettering, hand-delivered to a little flower shop on Mercer Street. He'd added a personal note in his sharp, slanting handwriting. "Come show the world how well you've handled the single life." He sent it with a smirk. He expected her to arrive wearing shame like a second skin. Is she really coming? I don't know. But I'm done hiding. Wait, who is that with her? Is that... Oh my God. But when the grand ballroom doors swung open and the crowd pulled apart like a tide retreating from something it instinctively feared, it wasn't shame that walked through. It was war. Have you ever been thrown away by someone who once promised you forever? Discarded not because you were broken, but because someone decided you no longer fit the picture they were building of themselves? And here, before we go any further, if you're listening to this right now, I want to ask you something. My mother and friends told me I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers. They said stories like this, one don't find an audience. Help me prove them wrong. Subscribe to Julia's Romance Library, and let's keep giving life to stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's begin. The morning light came through the blinds of Monica Burkhart's back room in thin, dusty ribbons, falling across buckets of pale ranunculus and bundles of eucalyptus that hadn't been arranged yet. She stood at the small mirror she'd hung beside the supply shelf, the one she usually only used to check if she had soil on her face before a customer walked in, and looked at herself for a long, quiet moment. She exhaled slowly. "You're going to be fine," she whispered. But her eyes told the truth her voice wouldn't. They were tired. Not from the early hours or the physical work. Tired in the deeper way, the way that comes from spending 2 years trying to unhear a single sentence. 2 years since the divorce. 2 years since Robert Hutton had looked at her across a conference table, in front of both legal teams, his personal assistant, and a woman with a court recorder who had the quiet dignity to keep her eyes down, and said, "You stopped being an asset, Monica. This is simply a business decision." She had signed the papers without shaking. That night, alone in the apartment she'd already begun quietly vacating in her mind, she had cried until her chest ached like something structural had given way. Now she had the shop. She had her flowers. She had the particular piece of a life made small enough to feel safe. And then his envelope arrived, sitting on her workbench between a bundle of white dahlias and a pair of pruning shears, golden and cruel and impossible to ignore. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, which felt deliberate. Robert had always understood that cruelty landed harder on ordinary days. Monica had recognized his handwriting before she'd even opened the envelope. That sharp, slanting script, the same one that had signed the asset division papers, the same one that had once written "I choose you" on a card tucked inside her birthday flowers, back when she had still believed he was capable of meaning it. She read the note twice. "Come show the world how well you've handled the single life." The charity gala. His annual performance of generosity, a room full of people whose net worth could end small countries, all dressed in black tie, applauding Robert Hutton for his philanthropic spirit while the photographers captured his best angle. She had attended 6 of them as his wife. She had smiled in every photograph. She had stood slightly behind him in every single one because he'd once mentioned, carefully, that it created better visual balance. She had believed that too. Monica set the invitation down. Outside, a woman was pushing a stroller past the shop window, unhurried, unbothered. The world continuing its indifferent rotation. She should throw it away. She knew that. The only sane response to a trap this transparent was to leave it unsprung. She picked up her pruning shears and went back to work. But the envelope sat there all afternoon. And when she finally locked up the shop at 7 and stood alone in the quiet, she made the mistake of reading his note one final time. Her hands, which had been steady through the divorce, through the asset hearings, through every careful dismantling of their shared life, weren't steady anymore. He came in on a Wednesday, which was unusual. He always came on Thursdays. Monica was rewrapping a broken stem when the door opened and the small bell above it rang once, and then the room changed. Not dramatically. Not the way a storm announces itself. More the way a temperature drops before one. Subtle. Undeniable. He was tall. Dark suit, no tie. The tattoo at his neck was a climbing vine of ink that disappeared beneath his collar, and his eyes moved across the shop the way certain men's eyes moved across rooms. Not browsing, assessing. He took in the arrangements, the coolers, the buckets of seasonal stems, and then he looked at her with the particular stillness of someone who never wasted a word before they decided it was necessary. "I need something that says a conversation is over," he said. Permanently. Monica held his gaze. In 4 years of running the shop, she had filled arrangements for proposals, funerals, apologies, and at least one very expensive attempt at a bribe. She had never been asked for this. "Dark florals," she said carefully. "Nothing soft. Black dahlias, dried protea, smoke bush. Nothing that wilts fast. You want it to last long enough to make the point." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Approval, maybe. Or recognition. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." He paid in cash. The name on the business card he left on the counter, sliding it across without ceremony, read simply, R. Ferguson. She didn't think about it again until that evening, when her neighbor's husband, a retired detective who drank his coffee too loudly, saw the card on her counter and went very quiet. "Monica," he said slowly. "How do you know that name?" He came back on Thursday. As usual, Monica had spent the night convincing herself not to ask. It wasn't her business who R. Ferguson was or why a retired detective had gone pale at the sight of his card. She ran a flower shop. She arranged stems. She stayed in her lane. She lasted until he reached the counter. "My neighbor recognized your name," she said, before she could stop herself. "He used to work homicide." Randy looked at her with that same unhurried stillness. "I know who he is." The air between them held for a moment. Monica exhaled and looked away first. It was then that he noticed Robert's gala invitation, still sitting on the corner of the workbench where she'd been unable to throw it away for 3 days running. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said nothing, but the silence had a shape to it. "It's from my ex-husband," she said. "It's designed to humiliate me. He wants me in that room so he can remind every powerful person in this city exactly what he discarded." Randy's jaw shifted slightly. "Then don't walk in alone." She almost laughed. "You're offering to come with me. I'm telling you a room only has as much power as you allow it." His eyes were steady, direct, carrying no performance. "Walk in on the right arm, and the whole architecture changes." If you've made it this far, thank you, truly, for watching. Drop a comment below, and tell me where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your own stories. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Now back to Monica. She searched his face for the angle, the catch, the cost. She found nothing but solid ground, and that, somehow, frightened her more than Robert ever had. The dress had been in the boutique window for 3 months. Monica had walked past it 47 times. She knew because she had counted, in the quiet, honest way a person counts the things they want but have decided they are not allowed to have. Teal. Floor length. A neckline that required a particular kind of courage she had been systematically taught to return to sender. She walked in on a Friday morning before she could negotiate herself out of it. The fitting room mirror was unforgiving in the way only good lighting could be, bright, even, nowhere to hide. Monica stood in the dress and looked at herself. Really looked. Her body was round and soft and present and entirely, undeniably hers. Robert's voice surfaced immediately, as it always did. That careful, architectural criticism dressed as concern. "You'd photograph better in something more structured. Something that doesn't draw attention to." She silenced it. With effort. With both hands, metaphorically speaking. she bought the dress. When she told Randy that afternoon, sliding his weekly arrangement across the counter, he looked at her for a moment and said simply, "Good. You haven't seen it. Doesn't matter." There was no flattery in his voice. No performance. Just a certainty that sat differently than compliments usually did. Heavier, more load-bearing. "I don't want you to change one single thing about how you walk into that room. Not your dress. Not your body. Not the way you take up space." He held her gaze. "You go in as exactly who you are." Monica said nothing. But that night, she laid the teal dress across the chair beside her bed instead of hanging it in the closet. And in the morning, it was the first thing she saw, and for once, she didn't look away. The Hutton Grand was built to make people feel small. Monica had forgotten that. Or perhaps she had simply spent 4 years of marriage adjusting to the smallness, the way you adjust to a room with not enough air, slowly, without noticing, until breathing normally feels like something you used to know how to do. Randy's car stopped at the entrance at exactly 8 o'clock. He stepped out first, buttoned his jacket once, and offered his hand. Monica took it and stepped onto the red carpet in her teal gown, her shoulders back, her chin level, her heart hammering against her ribs with a violence she refused to let reach her face. The doors opened. The reaction moved through the room like a current. She felt it before she saw it. That collective shift, the way sound stuttered and conversations snagged mid-sentence. Heads turned. Champagne glasses paused halfway to mouths. Somewhere to her left, a woman leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind a cupped hand. She caught fragments. "Is that Monica Hutton? Who is he? Wait. Is that Ferguson?" Randy moved through the room like weather. Not aggressive. Not performative. Simply inevitable. The crowd adjusted around him the way water adjusts around stone, instinctively, without being asked. And Monica didn't shrink. She walked beside him and let herself be seen, fully, without apology, for the first time in longer than she could name. Then she found Robert across the room. He was staring. The smirk she had braced herself for was gone. In its place was something she had never once seen on his face in 10 years of knowing him. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Like, follow, and subscribe. Now, let's continue. Calculation. And beneath it, very briefly, unmistakably, fear. They found a quiet corner near the east window, away from the photographers and the performance of it all. Monica accepted a glass of champagne she didn't intend to drink and watched Robert work the room. The handshakes, the practiced laughter, the way he angled himself toward cameras with the instinct of someone who had spent decades curating his own mythology. He hadn't approached them yet. He was waiting for the right moment, the right audience. That was how Robert operated. He never wasted cruelty on an empty stage. "You're watching him like you're preparing for something," Randy said quietly beside her. "I am." "Good." He looked out across the room. "Don't let him pick the moment. You pick it." Monica turned to look at him. Really look, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before. The tattoos at his neck caught the chandelier light. Up close she could see they were more intricate than she'd realized. Deliberate. Each line placed with intention. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "You can ask. What do you actually get from any of this? From helping me?" Randy was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and entirely without performance. "You spend your days making things grow. Cutting stems at the right angle so they can keep drinking. Building something alive out of what most people would call decoration." He paused. "I don't do that. I've never done that. What I do, it's the opposite of what you do." Monica felt the weight of what he wasn't saying settle between them. Then why? Because being near something that creates life instead of ending it, he stopped. Looked at her with an openness that seemed to cost him something. "It matters. You matter." The microphone at the front of the room crackled. Robert Hutton tapped his champagne glass and smiled directly at Monica. Robert's toast was elegant. It always was. He spoke about resilience, about the courage it took to build something from nothing, about the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people, and he let that last phrase land with a pause just long enough to mean something else entirely. His eyes found Monica twice during the speech. Both times he smiled the smile she had once mistaken for warmth. The applause was generous. It always was. He reached them 20 minutes later, moving through the crowd with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told no in a room he owned. He kissed Monica on the cheek before she could step back, a possessive, performative gesture designed for the people watching, and then turned to Randy with an expression that had been carefully constructed to look like courtesy. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Robert said. "No," Randy said. "We haven't." The silence that followed was brief and total. Robert's smile didn't waver. Monica always did have interesting taste. Though I have to say, his eyes moved deliberately to the tattoos at Randy's neck. I expected something a little more polished for an evening like this. But then, we can't all maintain standards. He laughed. It was designed to invite others nearby to laugh with him. Nobody did. Randy didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't adjust his expression, didn't blink at a rate that suggested anything had touched him. He simply looked at Robert Hutton with the complete, bottomless stillness of a man who had faced genuinely dangerous things and found this, almost restful. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with this story. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Now back to the moment. Robert's smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes went very, very quiet, like a man who has just realized, too late, that the thing he poked in the dark was not, in fact, asleep. It was the microphone that decided it. Robert had moved away, retreating with the careful dignity of a man rearranging his pride in private, when the evening's host announced an open floor, a tradition at Hutton galas, an invitation for guests to share words of inspiration and gratitude. A performance like everything else here. A curated moment designed to reflect well on the man who paid for the room. Monica didn't plan it. She would think about that afterward. How it wasn't rehearsed, wasn't strategic, wasn't the carefully constructed verbal blow she had imagined delivering in the mirror at 2 a.m. during the worst months after the divorce. She simply stood up. The room noticed immediately. She felt Randy's eyes on her, not pulling her back, not cautioning her. Just present. Steady. Bearing witness. She took the microphone. "I want to thank Robert," she said, and the room stilled with the particular attention of people who sense something real is about to happen in a space built entirely for performance. "For the invitation. For believing I needed this room to measure my worth." She paused. "I spent 4 years making myself smaller in spaces like this one. 4 years apologizing for my body, my voice, my presence. 4 years mistaking a cage for a life because the cage was expensive and the man holding the key was very good at calling it love." Her voice didn't shake. "I'm not angry anymore, Robert. I'm just done. Done carrying a version of myself that was built to make you comfortable." She set the microphone down with a quiet finality that landed louder than anything else she'd said. The room was silent. Robert stood at the back, his champagne glass motionless in his hand, his face arranged in a careful blankness that almost hid the thing underneath. Monica turned and walked back toward Randy. And then Robert Hutton did something nobody in that room had ever seen him do before. He followed her. That was what nobody in that room had ever seen Robert Hutton do. He crossed the ballroom floor with quick, uncharacteristic steps, his careful composure finally coming apart at the seams, and he caught Monica's arm just before she reached Randy. "You don't know what you're walking into," he said, low and urgent, his eyes cutting briefly to Randy with something that had moved well past calculation into something raw. "That man's world will destroy you, Monica. Whatever you think this is, it isn't safe." Monica looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at him with an expression so calm it seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "Neither was yours," she said quietly. "Yours just had better lighting." She removed his hand. Gently. Finally. 3 months later, the flower shop on Mercer Street had a second work table. Randy had installed it on a Saturday without announcing he was going to, arriving with tools and saying nothing beyond, "You need more space." Monica had watched him work and thought about all the ways protection could look, how it didn't always announce itself, didn't always arrive with conditions attached, didn't always ask you to be smaller in exchange for being kept. Sometimes it just quietly made more room. He still came in on Thursdays. Only now he stayed past closing, and the arrangements he ordered were no longer war bouquets. They were something softer. Something that looked unmistakably like beginning. Across the city, Robert Hutton attended his board meetings and his charity functions and his carefully photographed evenings. His empire remained intact. His reputation remained polished. But in the quiet moments, and there were more of them now, somehow, he thought about a woman in a teal dress walking away from a microphone, and how the room had watched her go. If you've made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching, for staying, for caring about Monica and Randy the way you have. Drop a comment below and tell me what this story meant to you. And if you want more stories like this one, head over to Julia's Romance Library. There are more waiting for you there. Subscribe so you never miss a single one. These stories exist because you choose to listen. And I will never stop being grateful for that.